My name is Tom, and I'm 34 years old, working as an engineer in Cleveland. For most of my adult life, I prided myself on being the sort of guy people could rely on, solid, dependable, not much for drama. I guess I always figured that if you worked hard and treated people right, life would, for the most part, treat you the same. And for years, my marriage to Maggie felt like proof of that. We weren't flashy, but we were real. Or so I thought. The night everything changed started out just like any other Tuesday. I'd stayed late at the office, fighting with an impossible bug in some code, then slogged my way through a traffic jam that seemed to drag on for hours. By the time I got home, Maggie was already asleep. I ate leftovers in the quiet kitchen, scrolled through some emails, and remembered I'd promised my mom I'd find her that old photo from our trip to Hocking Hills. That's how I ended up in our shared cloud account, poking around old folders, anniversaries, birthdays, vacation snaps, random dog videos. There was a weird comfort in all those digital memories, especially after a long day. But then I noticed a new upload, just from the night before, a video, unlabeled, short, 30 seconds, tops. Curiosity got the better of me. I tapped it open, not expecting anything earth-shattering. What I saw made my skin prickle. The setting looked like someone's house, living room lights low, music thumping, people talking in clusters. The phone camera jerked a little, landing on Maggie. She was dressed in that navy blue top I liked, the one she always said was for work, not play. But there was nothing work-like about the scene. Kevin, her boss, was standing right next to her. And not in a boss and employee kind of way, but more like two old friends or something more, comfortable in each other's space. He had his arms slung around her shoulders, hand resting a little too long, too casual. She leaned in, laughed, her face open and easy in a way I hadn't seen with me in a while. Then he said something I couldn't hear. She laughed again, her eyes locked on his, and for a split second, she reached up and squeezed his hand. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. The video ended abruptly, just some shaky movement and someone in the background calling for another drink. But those few seconds played over and over in my head. By the time Maggie came down for coffee the next morning, I'd already watched it a dozen times. I didn't say anything right away. I went through the motions, made breakfast, listened to her complain about her broken printer at work, nodded along as she told me she'd be late again that evening because of some big presentation coming up. I tried to be normal, but I kept hearing that laughter, seeing the way Kevin held her like he'd done it 100 times before. After work that night, I waited for her in the living room, pretending to scroll my phone but really just counting the minutes. She came home late, as promised, tossed her bag on the counter, and flopped on the couch. I couldn't take it anymore. "Maggie," I said, keeping my tone light, "can I show you something weird I found?" She looked up, distracted. "What?" I handed her my phone, open to the video. I watched her face as she realized what she was seeing. She didn't look guilty, just annoyed, like I'd caught her with her hand in the cookie jar and she wasn't sorry. "Oh my God, Tom," she said, rolling her eyes so hard it hurt to watch. "Seriously? It's just a work thing." We were all blowing off steam after a 15-hour day. Kevin always goofs around at these things. He's like that with everyone. "Is that so?" I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked. "It just looked kind of personal, I guess." She snorted. "Don't be ridiculous. You're reading into it. Trust me, if you saw how he acts at the office, you'd know this is nothing." She laughed sharp, humorless. "Honestly, Tom, are you jealous of Kevin? Really?" I shrugged, trying not to show how much that stung. "I mean, he had his arm around you." She ********* me a glare. "So? It's not like we were making out. Are you seriously this insecure? You know, this is why I don't tell you stuff, because you make drama where there is none." I was stunned by how fast she turned it on me. She snatched my phone, and before I could react, she deleted the video. "Just like that, gone?" "There," she said, tossing the phone back at me. "Now you don't have to obsess about it. Next time, try trusting me." She stood up and headed for the shower, not waiting for a response. I just sat there, staring at the empty spot on my camera roll where the video used to be, my mind spinning. I wanted to believe her, wanted to write it off as office culture or a dumb joke. But the way she'd acted, so defensive, so quick to blame me, left me feeling like I'd missed something important. The rest of that night, I wandered around our apartment, half-heartedly tidying up, my thoughts looping. Why had she deleted the video if it really was nothing? Why had she looked so annoyed instead of embarrassed or apologetic? I replayed every recent memory, trying to spot the cracks I might have ignored. Late nights at work, last-minute plans with the team, new clothes appearing out of nowhere, her phone suddenly glued to her hand and set to silent. When I finally crawled into bed, she was already asleep, turned away from me, breathing slow and steady. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was crazy, or if my instincts were trying to tell me something I didn't want to hear. That was the first night I realized I didn't know my wife as well as I thought. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But every time Maggie laughed at a text, every time she said she was working late, every time she left the room to take a call, I remembered that video. The way Kevin looked at her, the way she looked back, the way she so easily made it my fault for asking. People always say trust is everything in a marriage. I used to agree, but now I wonder if it's really just the first thing to go when you start to see the truth. After that night, something inside me shifted. Even if I tried to pretend otherwise, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ground under my feet had started to crack. I spent the next few days moving through my routines like a ghost. Work, home, dinner, bed. Maggie went on with her life as if nothing had happened. She laughed at her phone, texted with colleagues, and tossed off casual comments about office politics. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, I felt like I was losing my mind. I started replaying the last few months in my head, analyzing every moment that had seemed just a little bit off. In hindsight, it was like flipping through a deck of red flags. Only now did I see them for what they were. There was the week in March when Maggie started working late, claiming the new project was crunch time. Before, she'd always call on her way home, tell me when she'd be late. Now, she'd just text, sometimes hours after she was supposed to be back. Don't wait up. Big deadline. Love you. I'd ask about her day, and she'd just shrug it off. Too tired to talk. It's just work, Tom. I don't want to bring that stress home. And the gifts. Little things at first. A fancy insulated mug from a grateful client. A designer notebook left over from a company retreat. Then bigger things, perfume, a silk scarf, even a necklace she said was a holiday giveaway. I noticed the brand was a little out of our usual league, but I didn't want to sound ungrateful, so I just smiled and told her she deserved it. Her phone was another thing. She'd never been secretive before. She used to leave it on the table, screen up, no password. Lately, though, she kept it locked, face down, always within arm's reach. She started getting notifications from someone saved as K. Text after text, sometimes late at night. When I asked, she shrugged. Just Kevin. Updating me on the project. He's a workaholic. What can I say? She got defensive if I even glanced at her phone. What, you don't trust me? She'd say. Eyes narrowed, voice cold. You're getting paranoid, Tom. I tried to believe her. I wanted to. But the more I tried, the more it felt like I was gaslighting myself. I became hyper-aware of every detail. The way she'd leave the room to take calls, her abrupt mood swings, how she'd come home tired but too wired to sleep. Sometimes, she'd be so irritable that the smallest thing, me asking about her day, suggesting we order takeout, would set her off. Even at home, it felt like Maggie was slipping away from me. She'd drift through the apartment like a shadow, barely making eye contact, always claiming to have something important to do. Laundry, emails, a work call, even when it was 10 at night on a Saturday. When I suggested we watch a movie or go out for dinner like we used to, she'd sigh, check her phone, and say, I can't tonight. Too much on my plate. Once, I caught her in the middle of the night, standing by the window with her phone pressed to her ear. She whispered, laughed softly, and when I cleared my throat, she jumped and quickly ended the call. Just a friend from work in a different time zone, she said, not looking at me. Go back to bed. I lay awake after that, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing. She slept with her back to me, her body curled tightly on the far edge of the bed. I reached out to touch her shoulder, but she flinched and muttered, I'm just tired, Tom. Let me sleep. It was around then I realized our conversations had changed. We used to talk about everything, future vacations, work problems, even dumb reality TV. Lately, every topic seemed to annoy her. If I mentioned work, she'd roll her eyes. If I talked about the future, she'd get quiet and say, Can we not right now? I have a headache. I started to doubt myself. Was I making things worse by asking? Was I really being too needy, too suspicious? Maybe I was overthinking it. I tried to push the thoughts away, tried to be a better husband, more supportive, more chill. But the harder I tried, the more distance grew between us. It got to the point where I'd come home and listen for signs. Was she in a good mood or a bad one? Would she be up for dinner together? Or would she shut herself in the office again? I started feeling like a stranger in my own house, tiptoeing around my wife. The loneliness was the worst part. I missed her, and yet she was right there, just out of reach. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of the old Maggie. A quick smile, a shared joke, a familiar warmth in her voice, and for a moment, I'd hope things were okay. But those moments never lasted. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it yet. I kept telling myself that every marriage has rough patches, that we'd get through it. But the doubt was growing, a slow poison in my chest. And no matter how many times I told myself I was just being paranoid, I couldn't stop noticing all the little ways she changed. Especially the way she started avoiding me, like she was hiding a piece of herself I wasn't allowed to see. Looking back, I realized I wasn't just losing trust in Maggie. I was starting to lose trust in myself. It's strange the way certainty hits you. There's all this buildup, months of doubt, 1,000 little clues, nights spent turning things over in your head. But then, in a single moment, it all snaps into focus. There's no relief in it, just this cold clarity that makes you wish you were wrong. For me, that moment came on a rainy Thursday. I'd had enough of sitting at home, waiting for Maggie to stumble through the door with another excuse. I convinced myself it was just a spontaneous idea, but the truth is I needed to see for myself what she was really doing all those late nights at the office. She told me she was working late again. We're finishing the client deck. Don't wait up. She barely looked at me when she said it. Something in her tone, flat, rehearsed, made my chest tighten. After she left, I sat staring at the door for a long time. Eventually, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Maybe I was hoping to prove myself wrong, to catch her in some innocent, boring meeting. But deep down, I knew I was chasing confirmation, not comfort. I drove to her office downtown, parking across the street where I could see the glow of the top floor's windows. The building was half empty, the rain streaking the glass. I waited in the car, feeling stupid and desperate, but unable to drive away. After 20 minutes, I saw movement, lights flickering, shapes moving through the windows. I watched as Maggie walked into a meeting room, her coat off, hair a little damp from the rain. Kevin was there too, pacing around, talking with his hands. From a distance, they looked like colleagues deep in discussion. But then Maggie laughed at something, and Kevin moved closer. Too close. He touched her arm, leaned in, said something that made her smile, really smile. I got out of the car and crossed the street, careful not to be seen. I ducked under the awning and, through the big glass windows, watched as Kevin reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They talked quietly for a few minutes, the kind of conversation you have with someone you trust, someone you're comfortable with. I felt my face burn. Then, suddenly, Maggie stood up, glancing around like she was checking for witnesses. Kevin followed her to the far side of the room, near the thick curtains that separated the office from a small lounge area. She disappeared behind the curtain, and Kevin followed, the fabric swaying for a moment before settling back into place. I stood there, soaked in the rain, my hands shaking. Every instinct screamed at me to storm inside, to rip open the curtain and demand answers. But I stayed rooted to the sidewalk, watching, feeling more helpless than I'd ever felt in my life. 10, maybe 15 minutes passed, enough time for my doubt to dissolve into something darker, more final. When Maggie and Kevin finally reappeared, they were laughing, heads close together, not a hint of guilt in their posture. She grabbed her coat, and they left the room side by side. My heart pounded as I watched them slip out a side exit, hand in hand, moving quickly into the night. They didn't see me, standing in the shadows, drenched and frozen. I watched them cross the street together, Maggie's hair shining under the streetlights as she laughed at something Kevin said. For the first time, I didn't feel jealous or angry. I just felt hollow. The truth was undeniable. Right there in front of me, stripped of all the comforting lies I'd been feeding myself. As they walked away, I realized there were no more excuses left. No more explanations about late nights or innocent office jokes. All the small doubts, the warnings I tried to ignore, crashed together into a single, brutal fact: Maggie was having an affair. And I was the last to know. I stood on that street for a long time after they disappeared, the city moving on around me as if nothing had happened. It was over. I knew it. Even if I'd wanted to pretend, I couldn't anymore. By the time I got back to my car, my clothes were soaked and my mind felt strangely quiet. I sat in the dark for a while, hands gripping the wheel, watching the rain blur the city lights. I thought about our life together, the inside jokes, the vacations, the ordinary Tuesday nights that used to feel like enough. It all felt like it belonged to someone else. That night, when I finally walked back through our front door, Maggie was already home. She was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, humming to herself like nothing was wrong. I watched her from the hallway, trying to remember the last time she'd looked at me the way she'd looked at Kevin. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. There was nothing left to ask. All that was left was the truth, and it sat between us, unspoken but undeniable. I don't remember the drive home that night. It was just headlights, windshield wipers, and the heavy thud of my heart in my chest. I parked outside the apartment and just sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard lights. Part of me wanted to turn around and drive anywhere else. But I knew I couldn't run forever. When I finally walked through the front door, the house was too quiet. Maggie was in the kitchen, still dressed from work, swirling the last bit of wine in her glass. She looked up when she heard me but didn't smile. "Hey," she said, her voice neutral, maybe even a little wary. "You're home late?" "Yeah," I replied, shrugging off my jacket. I hung it up slowly, buying myself a few seconds. I could feel the distance between us, like we were two strangers occupying the same space, just waiting for the other to make a move. She busied herself rinsing the glass, but I could tell she was watching me out of the corner of her eye. I took a deep breath, sat down at the kitchen table, and waited until she finally turned to face me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but trembling. She froze, her hands still on the sink. For a long moment, neither of us moved. "What about?" she asked, feigning ignorance, but her eyes darted away. I felt the urge to scream, to accuse, to let every ugly thought tumble out at once. But I held it in. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, and it always ended the same way, with me searching her face for something, anything that would make sense. "I saw you tonight," I said quietly. "With Kevin. At the office." Maggie's face went white, just for a second, then smoothed out into something unreadable. "Tom, I told you this project is—" "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't say it's about work. I watched you leave together. I saw you holding hands." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked away, fingers tapping the counter nervously. When she finally spoke, her tone was sharp, defensive. "You followed me," she said, her voice rising. "Are you seriously spying on me now? That's really messed up, Tom." I shook my head, more sad than angry. "Don't turn this around on me, Maggie. Just tell me the truth. Is there something going on with you and Kevin?" For a long time, she didn't answer. She just stared at the wall, jaw clenched, as if she could will herself somewhere else. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "There's nothing between us. You're making this into something it's not." "Then why do you look guilty?" I pressed. "Why do you keep lying to me? I just want you to be honest, Maggie. Please." She laughed, cold, brittle. "You're paranoid, Tom. You keep searching for reasons to be upset. Do you know how exhausting it is, always having to defend myself from your accusations? Maybe if you trusted me." "Trusted you?" My voice cracked. "How am I supposed to trust you when you act like this? You come home late every night, you never talk to me, you spend half your time on your phone with Kay, and now I see you with him, holding hands, sneaking around behind the curtains. What am I supposed to think?" She didn't answer. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. I tried one last time, my voice barely holding together. "Do you even love me anymore, Maggie?" She stared at the floor, lips pressed tight. For a second, I thought she might finally let down her guard and tell me the truth, ugly as it was. But instead, she shook her head slowly. "I don't know," she whispered. Those 3 words felt like a punch to the gut. I waited, hoping she'd say more, offer some sliver of hope or regret. But she just stood there, blinking back tears, as if that single admission had drained the last bit of fight from her. I stood up, the chair scraping against the tile, and walked past her without another word. I heard her footsteps follow, then pause. Maybe she wanted to say something else, an apology, a confession, a plea for another chance. But all I heard was silence. That was the moment I realized we'd reached the point of no return. There was nothing left to salvage, not the trust, not the love, not even the comfort of routine. The foundation of our life together had crumbled, and all we could do now was sift through the wreckage. That night, I lay awake in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of Maggie moving around the apartment, opening and closing drawers, making tea she wouldn't drink. I wondered if she felt anything, regret, relief, fear, or if she was already gone in every way that mattered. For the first time in years, I didn't try to reach for her. I didn't beg her to talk, to explain, to fix what was broken. I just let her drift farther away, the silence between us louder than any argument. When dawn finally broke, I knew what I had to do. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of our old radiator. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Maggie's words, "I don't know." They echoed in my head, hollow and final. I kept waiting for something to change, maybe for her to knock on the door, to come in and say she'd been wrong, that she wanted to fight for us. But the apartment stayed quiet. I heard her footsteps fade as she moved into the guest room. After a while, even those sounds disappeared. It was just me and the reality I could no longer ignore. At dawn, I got up quietly and started packing. There was a strange numbness to it, like I was watching someone else move around our bedroom, pulling shirts from drawers, folding sweaters Maggie had bought me for birthdays past. I boxed up my books, my old work laptop, the random bits and pieces of my life that didn't belong to us anymore. Every now and then, I'd pause, staring at something, a photo, a mug, a note in her handwriting, and I'd have to swallow hard to keep moving. I kept expecting Maggie to wake up and stop me. But when I peeked into the hallway, her door was shut tight. I wondered if she was lying awake on the other side, listening, or if she was actually sleeping for once, finally unburdened. The sun crept through the blinds as I loaded my bags into the car. It all felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. This was the place we'd built together, where we'd hosted friends, argued about paint colors, made plans for trips we'd never take. Leaving felt like giving up, but staying any longer would have just meant lying to myself. I sat at the kitchen table for a minute, letting the stillness sink in. I tried to remember how it felt to come home and actually feel at home. Tried to picture the version of us that used to exist, back when trust was something we took for granted. My phone buzzed on the table. It was my boss, just a simple reminder about a project deadline. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then called him instead. I told him I was quitting. No long explanation. I just said I needed to step away and wouldn't be coming back. I could hear the confusion in his voice, but I didn't care. I didn't want to walk past Kevin's smug face in the office halls. I didn't want the gossip, the pitying looks. I needed a clean break from everything. When I finally finished packing, I went back inside one last time. Maggie was sitting at the kitchen counter, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed, but she didn't say anything. There were no apologies, no big scenes, just a tired, wordless acceptance that this was how it was going to end. I set my keys on the counter. "I'm leaving," I said, voice steadier than I expected. She nodded. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she just stared down at her mug. I waited for her to say something. "I'm sorry, don't go, let's try again." But she stayed silent, and after a while, I turned and walked out the door. The morning air was cold, but for the first time in months, I could actually breathe. I drove across the city to my friend Will's place. He'd always said I could crash with him if things ever went sideways. When I pulled up, he didn't ask questions. He just let me in, handed me a cup of coffee, and told me to get some sleep. That first day away, I felt empty and raw, but there was also a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore, but it wasn't tangled up in uncertainty anymore. I knew where I stood. I knew what I'd lost. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was just quiet and the hope that maybe, eventually, I'd be able to start over. A few months passed, but the pain didn't fade overnight. At first, every day felt the same, waking up in Will's spare room, half expecting to hear Maggie in the kitchen, then remembering I'd left that part of my life behind. Will tried his best to keep me busy. We'd watch sports, order pizza, play old video games from college days. Sometimes we talked about what happened, but most of the time, we didn't. The silence was easier than the details. I got a job offer in Columbus, far enough away that I wouldn't have to worry about running into anyone from the old office, or worse, Maggie and Kevin. The move felt good, necessary, a line drawn between my past and whatever came next. My apartment was small and bare bones, but it was mine. No reminders of Maggie in the closet, no awkward silences, just the hum of the fridge and the distant sounds of a city I was still learning to call home. For a while, I wondered if I'd ever really move on. Some nights I'd lie awake, replaying everything, what I should have said, what I could have done differently, the early signs I'd ignored. But little by little, life filled in the gaps. I started hitting the gym again, caught up with friends I drifted from, even took up running, mostly because it gave me something to do with the nervous energy that wouldn't quite go away. It was on a run one Saturday morning, weaving through a park as the leaves changed color, that I realized I hadn't thought about Maggie in days. The realization didn't hurt, it was more like noticing a scar had finally faded. I wasn't angry or resentful. I was just done. A few weeks later, I ran into Maggie by accident at a coffee shop downtown. She was with Kevin, holding hands, looking relaxed and happy in a way she never had around me those last months. For a moment, I felt a flicker of something, jealousy, maybe, or nostalgia. But it passed quickly. Maggie saw me too, and for a split second, we locked eyes. She looked startled, maybe even a little guilty, but there was no confrontation, no drama. Just a nod, an awkward smile, and she turned away. I walked out of the cafe and into the sunlight, and as I did, I realized I felt lighter. There was no anger left, no urge to go back and ask why. I didn't need closure. I already had it. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped being the guy who got cheated on and started being myself again. Not the old Tom, but someone who'd survived a storm and come out the other side. Someone who understood the value of trust and the danger of looking away when the warning signs are right in front of you. Life didn't magically get better. I still had rough days. Sometimes the loneliness hit harder than I expected. But each day, it got a little easier. I learned to be okay with being on my own, and slowly I started to hope again, not for things to go back to the way they were, but for something new. Something real. And that was enough.